How to determine co-founder equity. This is a topic that keeps coming up during office hours and the advisory session. So I thought I'd be efficient and record one thing that I can just send out every time we ask this question. Co-founder equity. So let me give you a scenario, because one of the main reasons founders, co-founders, startups break up is because of co-founder issues. And just like marriages, money can become a very contentious thing and become kind of that staging point for friction and fracture to occur. So it's important to kind of hope for the best, plan for the worst when it comes to co-founder equity. Let me give you two scenarios. Scenario A, two co-founders are rocking it. They start a startup. It's exciting. It just starts off as a project. They're like hacking away. And then what happens is one co-founder, after maybe you've raised a seed round or gotten a Series A, one co-founder decides, not gonna really do stuff anymore, or I've lost the thrill. The thrill is gone, and issues start to happen because the other co-founder starts taking all the weight of that. But you're equal co-founders, so what do? What happens? How do you unwind this thing, etc.? That's a tough one, because say the co-founder wants to leave and says, I put in all this time and I've earned all my equity in the company, and takes off. And now you've got, dead money on your cap table. And that is not a good thing. That's a tough thing, because, someone can hold your company hostage, depending on what your cap table looks like. So you don't want to be in that situation. Now let's have another scenario. One founder says, I got a really great idea, and says, got this figured out. I'm going to bring a co-founder, brings on a technical co-founder, and says, since it was my idea and I started the company, maybe you filed the papers, something like that, I'm going to give you 10%. And just give you 10%. And they start plunking away. And then the success happens. Seed round comes in, A round comes in, start getting some traction. And guess what? The techno person who's been building the solution the whole time starts to get a little demotivated, because that technical person is looking around going, wait a second, I'm doing the lion's share of the work. I'm the CTO. This doesn't happen without me. And even though the other co-founder might be doing some very legitimate things like sales and all the other stuff that happens inside a company, the techno founder starts to feel a little resentful and starts to disengage. And then guess what? Great. No, you don't have the situation where you have a co-founder that's disengaged but owns 50% of the company and is taken a hostage. But then you've got a co-founder that could have been really engaged and been working, and now that ship has sailed. You can't, undo that, because all the feelings have bubbled up, and by that time there's success, and when there's real money, and issues start to occur. So really smart investors, they will actually look at co-founder configurations and who owns what, and what are the types of relationships. Did you meet like a Las Vegas style hackathon? It's been just crazy type of relationship, shotgun wedding, all that stuff. Or do you have a long friendship? How do you handle conflict? What are the conversations of equity, etc.? And that can lead to some sticky situations. Or you can set it up where it doesn't become an issue and everybody is excited and they're working equally as hard. So we're going to go through a few different ways that you can look at co-founder equity and figure out how to go about what works best for you. I'm going to lay out some scenarios. Now, one size does not fit all. And the other important thing is to know that the definition of co-founder for me is someone who is literally a co-founder, someone who is going to work just as hard as you to found the business with you, be a founder, and collaborate, connect, co-create, all that stuff, coexist with all the ups and downs as far as a co-founder. So even throwing that title around can be very dangerous. Sometimes it's just better to say you're hire number one or number two, etc. But co-founder has a specific implication. There's responsibility. When you say co-founder, this, this person is my co-founder, you're talking to an investor, that investor thinks certain things about the responsibility of that person that you might not be thinking. So you're gonna be careful about the title co-founder. Okay, so first of all, definitions are important. We live in our language, so let's really analyze what that looks like. So here are some methods that you can figure out and see if they work for you. So method for me, the one for me that I like to use is everybody is equal. Okay, but there are vesting schedules plus cliffs. Let me explain. So when I want to look for co-founders, I want people who will carry the equal weight, and I want all of us to be equally incentivized. Therefore, it really takes me a lot more effort and reflection to figure out who I want as a co-founder. I don't want overlap in skills a lot. You can have some, and I want everybody to be equally involved and equally responsible and have the equal amount of contribution possible to make the startup successful. In other words, a startup wouldn't succeed unless everybody's equally pulling weight. I put myself in that mindset because that's how I decide whether I just go willy-nilly, whether I'm going willy-nilly, and avoid a lot of co-founder mistakes that I've made in the past. So if I really believe that they'll care just as much as me and take just as much responsibility as I will, then I want them to be equally incentivized. I want them to feel equal with me. And I just think that's good leadership. But what happens is they got to be the right people. We all go on vesting schedules. So what a vesting schedule is over a series or period of time and series of milestones, you earn your shares. So in the beginning, you have 0 shares. And maybe what you do is you do a vesting schedule times 4 years. And so the cliff happens that after a year, you get your first 25% of shares. But if you don't, guess what? And you leave within the year, you get nothing. That's the cliff. This allows you to be more generous with your shares because you know people are going to earn them. And if they've stayed through the first year, you've done your job well, and you've gotten 25% of your shares vested, and you've contributed, and your startup hasn't shut down by that time, well, that's earned. And then after that, for every month or every quarter, you can do it on a schedule. People go, you earn the rest of your shares. So you got 25%. For the rest, 3 years after that, you earn your 75% as you go. But the other way to do it is to extend the vesting schedule. So some people think it needs to be a little bit longer. You can really think about the commitment, and it puts the onus on the other co-founder to decide, am I really going to be here for a whole year? And so that they don't just, take their stock and run away with it type thing. So it prevents people from taking advantage of a more generous co-founder, if you will, giving equal shares. And that just protects me. And I like that scenario. Now, if I don't trust that the other person is going to be equal to me and work just hard, I'm not going to make them a co-founder. Might as well make them employee number 1 or something along those lines. But that's the next scenario. The other way that you can go about it, now let me just go pick another color here, is something called the slicing pie method. Slicing, and let me just clean up my writing here. Slicing pie method. And you can go, I believe it's slicingpie.com. And that's where you earn pieces of the pie. And what you do is you figure out the contribution, and then you just divide a piece of pie based on total meritocracy. So you earn equity. So I'll give you an example. So for example, 2 co-founders put in 100 grand each. They get 50-50 of the company because you put 100,000 plus 100,000 equals 200,000, 50-50. That's equal. But what about sweat equity? What about assets? Well, you value them at different things. So like, for example, cash is valued at 4 times the amount, and sweat equity is valued at 2 times the amount of what that individual will be getting paid at another similar type of job that if you hired them. So for example, say one individual puts $100,000 cash in, then guess what? They've earned $400,000 of equity. So it's 4 times. And then somebody puts in $50,000 worth of work. They've owned 2 times. They got $100,000 of equity. So now you've got 400,000 plus 100,000 is 500,000. The sweat equity person has 20% of the company. All right. So you can look up slicingpie.com and do that. But what's nice is that you can actually unwind based upon units of pie that individual has earned. And so it depends on if you release them or they quit. If you release them, they get 100% of what they earn. And then if they leave, then you have to pay them out at a discounted rate because they're the ones choosing to leave. So that puts a lot of balance in terms of how to decide when you want to get rid of a co-founder, et cetera. Okay, so that's how that works. Now, both are equal in method 1 and method 2 because you can get out of it. For example, in method 1, you're equal with vesting. If in that first year that co-founder doesn't perform and all the shareholders or the other co-founders vote that co-founder out and they fire him, no harm, no foul. You don't have any major event. Well, this protects people just a little bit, prevents co-founders from ganging up on someone who's minority and saying, we don't like you anymore, we want your shares. Well, they have to get paid out everything, the maximum value. But if that person leaves, then they get paid out at a discount value. So there's formulas that you do it, and they've got worksheets and all that stuff. Okay, so that's the slicing pie method where you start to calculate contributions. Now, the issue with that is, and I've done this with some startups, well, it's a lot of work. Like, how do you value hours? And I don't know about you, but the hours that I put in my startups, that's not something you just punch in for. I'm always thinking about it, etc. So there are ways to do it, such as setting expectations of what standard salaries would be if you were working to compensate for the cost of opportunity, but it's heavy administratively. And so I find that it can kind of get laborious. It starts to get a little cumbersome and people start to check out. Okay, so that's method number 2. Then finally, let's talk about method number 3, which is kind of like what I call the free-for-all method. Is just negotiate. And what's important is that everybody has different needs. Some people don't need more, and some people don't need the different types of financial incentives, etc. They're just super passionate about it. But what you want to avoid is later on people getting resentful. So you can negotiate, and then what you can do is sort of create different things like option pools for milestones, right? You can have profit sharing. I know a founder that does no co-founders in equity, but does very generous profit share. And that's just for people who want an annual check. They just want cash. They don't care about long-term equity. The company sells, they get nothing, but they're getting paid very well along the way. So you've got different ways to structure, and then you can own 100% of the company, or you can say, guess what? You can have options to eventually own 2% of the company. So that works great if you've got one co-founder that's especially a full stack co-founder. So that co-founder can be a coder, especially if the co-founder is a technical co-founder and can program it themselves and they need other additional help. That's where you can start to negotiate different types of incentive systems and not one size fits all. And what I stress is have multiple conversations. Because everybody always gets excited. This is why I say hope for the best, plan for the worst. Everyone gets excited. It's so romantic in the beginning, etc. But what about having regular conversations where we review the compensation plan and how people are feeling so people can weigh in and before they have to buy in, and they check in, and you can take a temperature and figure out, are there some other things that we need to do to adjust this situation? So these are kind of the three scenarios. And remember, in the beginning, equity is very expensive. That is going to be the most expensive equity you ever give away. Well, at the same time, if you don't give it away, being in a startup in the early stages is extremely risky. So that's where I shy away from situations where someone comes in and they bring on a co-founder expected to do equal heavy lifting and just be just as intense as everybody else, but they give them a smaller equity to earn. And then what happens is people check out and they disengage, and then all these fights start to happen. And because what happens is, say that person is a technical co-founder, they're putting up a lot of risk for that startup to potentially fail. So if you're not giving them cash, and that's where slicing pie is really great, because it factors in and gives cash more weight in terms of earning that pie. If you're not giving them cash, well, there's a cost of opportunity, and you don't want the founder resentful. I worked all this time and now I got 10%. I've seen founders where they have so many co-founders and they work really hard and they go A round, seed, A, B, C, D round, and they get diluted so much as a co-founder that by the time there's a liquidity event and the company goes public, that co-founder has got like literally nothing, like less than 1%. And that's a horrible feeling. And guess what happens is it just feels bad. You get bitter. And usually what founders do is they take it out, rightfully so, in the sense of setting strong boundaries, but they'll take it out on the next venture and they'll become very unreasonable. Or I've seen founders get very entitled and they make these huge demands and they mess up the cap table. So investors come in and go, wait a second, how did you do a deal with this? And how did this co-founder earn so much? It happens with early investors where later on professional investors won't touch your company. So this is very important to really think through the implications, and you want to have a balance of, in the long run, don't over administrate it, but at the same time, think about how do you prevent the real ugly stuff from happening by being open and transparent with everything right in the beginning. I hope that's helpful in terms of deciding how to divide and allocate co-founder equity. Think it through, work through the scenarios. I always say, again, hope for the best, but plan for the worst. And part of that is actually thinking about what's the worst thing that could happen. This person could leave. I've been in scenarios where I've been given the smallest amount of shares to come in, and because I perform, everybody gets really worried and they say, you know what? If Ed leaves, we're hooped. This startup is going to be hooped. So what is the situation? And smart investors will come in and say, you need to incentivize your performers and figure that out. But unfortunately, I've also been in situations where I haven't been acknowledged for my performance. And guess what? After a while, I just think it's unfair. I can go do my own thing and I go check out. So think through all the different scenarios and prepare yourself for them. Always hope for the best. You never know. You could luck out and have some amazing co-founders and never have a co-founder fight, or prepare for the worst. And when those situations come up, you're ready to deal with them and things get worked out and your startup is all the better for it.